Welcome back. It is 6:41 on your Friday morning. Certainly been a busy week in Washington. Joe Biden issued a bunch of pardons before he left office. Then Donald Trump took over and signed a stack of executive orders, including some pardons of his own. So let's break down how all of this works in Washington. Attorney David Betras is here for Legally Speaking. Good to see you, as always.
Good to see you. I brought the goodies.
Yes.
We'll take a shot at
We'll talk about that in a bit. Well, let's start at the beginning, since President Biden was the outgoing president, and he issued a bunch of pardons, including the interesting part was some pardons for people who hadn't actually been convicted of anything yet, almost like a preemptive strike. How does that work?
Well, it's in the Constitution. Article 2, let me see if I can remember. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 gives unlimited power to the President of the United States to issue pardons and clemency and preemptive pardons. Now, what's the difference between a pardon and clemency? A pardon is like you never committed the crime, like your slate.
So just wipes it clean.
Wipes it clean. Clemency is you've been in jail so many years, I'm going to commute your sentence to whatever you served and you're out. So that's the difference between pardons and clemency, and there's nothing that could check that. That is like a king. Like a king, he could do that. That's really the only place in the Constitution where they grant that.
So then when President Trump, one of his executive orders was to pardon the January 6th rioters and everything. So if somebody was sitting in jail for the last 2 years and they're now out, it's like that never happened on their record?
Well, he issued, I think, 6 clemencies, and the rest of them were pardons.
Okay.
So the clemency people still have the conviction. Okay. They're just out of jail. Mm-hmm. If he pardoned someone, it's like it never happened. It's like they don't have a crime. It's like they don't have a record. Although it gets wiped off their official record with the internet now.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It's like an expungement. Remember how we've talked about expungements? That's exactly what it is. He goes back and he just erases everything that happened.
A giant presidential eraser.
Yeah.
Right? There's been a lot of controversy over one of the executive orders. That's the one that deals with birthright citizenship, which seems on its face to go against protections laid out in the 14th Amendment. So does a president have power through executive order to change any part of the Constitution?
Well, I'm going to talk about executive orders in conjunction with TikTok.
Okay.
Okay. So the president signed an executive order extending TikTok, and the president signed an executive order ending birthright citizenship. Both of those, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but an executive order is less than legislation passed by Congress. Okay. So a president cannot sign an executive order that is in contravention of what the United States Congress has passed, because you remember, we have 3 equal branches of government. Now, regarding birthright citizenship, that came from the 14th Amendment. Why did they do that? Because the Supreme Court prior to that ruled that enslaved people were not American citizens even though they were born here. So in the 14th Amendment, they have a clause that says if you are born on American soil or if you're abroad under American jurisdiction or whatever, if you're born here, you are an American citizen. A case interpreting that is from 1898, United States versus Wong Sung, which said what clearly the 14th Amendment says: if you're born on American soil, you are then considered an American. Now, that's ultimately going to make its way to the United States Supreme Court, and they can ultimately ultimately rule on what the Constitution says. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the land, and their main job is to interpret the Constitution. And they could even make a ruling, okay? They could. I don't think they will, because they're textualists, meaning they're just looking at what the Constitution says and applying it. They could, if they wanted to, change that Wong Sung case from 1898, but I don't think they will. So they'll ultimately have to rule on that executive order.
So basically the Supreme Court could make that change, but the president cannot through an executive order.
No, the president cannot, because the Supreme Court is the branch of government that rules on this. Boy, you're taking me back to law school. They put their stake in the ground in a case called Marbury versus Madison, where they said, we're the bosses of anything anyone does on whether it passes constitutional sauce or not.
That's interesting stuff today.
It is interesting stuff.
I appreciate it. And the interesting stuff is over on the kitchen.
Oh, look at us.
Wow, that is a beauty shot and a half.
I got to take a little piece of that. It's Rafe from Landmark. He does us well every week.
Rafe is the man. One of the boxes is closed right now. I assure you there's goodies in there too. Dave,
all
thank
right.
you as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, glad to.